everyone. Tonight we are traveling somewhere strange. Picture this. You're standing in a snow-blanketed forest in medieval Finland. The trees tower in every direction, their bare limbs weighed down by ice. The world is quiet, too quiet like a room right after someone leaves. You'd better train a wild animal to do it for you. And then, out of the white, you hear it. The faint creak of leather straps, the low puff of heavy breath in freezing air. Something is coming. And that something is 8 feet long, weighs nearly half a ton, and has antlers that could clean the snow off your roof. It's a moose. But not just any moose, this one has a saddle, a leather pouch slung over its side. Birch trees line your path, their white bark glowing faintly in the moonlight. The air smells clean, like ice and pine sap. You pull your fur-lined hood tighter, breath puffing in front of you, and pause to listen again. His face is red from cold, but he's smiling. The post has arrived. There it is. The sound of hooves heavy and deliberate just past the next rise. And what looks suspiciously like a letter in its teeth. You probably won't survive this era. If you lived in one of the countless remote settlements sprinkled across the dense Finnish forests, sending a message to your cousin 2 valleys over was less like mailing a letter and more like launching a military expedition. And when spring came, he found the beast followed him on his routes across frozen lakes, through snowdrifts, even into villages. And unlike horses, it didn't collapse in -40 temperatures just because its hooves got cold. Soon, people began to notice. Yes, let's start a national postal service using oversized deer with anger issues. It began slowly, almost accidentally. One winter, so the legend goes, a starving trapper found an orphan calf moose half buried in the snow. With nothing else to eat and no one else to talk to, he took it home. Twilight in this part of the world lingers like a houseguest that won't leave. The man's name is all he offers you a dried fish from his pack. You chew it reluctantly. It tastes like regret dipped in salt. Or when a rival village tried to steal a trained moose by dressing in the other town's colors. The moose, being smarter than all of them, walked in the opposite direction. You're standing in the middle of a world where wolves outnumber people, winter lasts 9 months, and if you want to send a message. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Not fast, he says, but fair. Then he laughs. Like my uncle after 2 tankards. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft background music, and let's enjoy our evening ride together. You're not just observing history anymore. You're part of it. A quiet companion in a story too strange to be fiction and too forgotten to be famous. The name is scrawled in elegant ink. Talempi East Ravaka. No address, no postage. Just faith that the moose and the people who train them know the way. Your boots crunch softly over a crust of snow as you shuffle forward. One village priest called it the work of frosty demons. It doesn't matter. You're not finding your way. The moose is. Every few hundred steps, he clicks his tongue and the moose stops. He opens the saddle pouch, pulls out a frozen wax-sealed letter, and tucks it behind a tree stump marked with red paint. It looks random, but you soon notice the pattern. Hidden drop points? Like the world's slowest and furriest game of espionage. Another man tried to prove a moose couldn't possibly carry mail by tying himself to one and yelling science. He ended up in a snowbank for 2 days. You crest a hill and there it stands, the moose. It's taller than any horse you've seen. A bull, judging by the wide, flat antlers. But there's something off. Something. Organized. The creature's flanks are wrapped in a stiff harness stitched from elk hide and iron clasps. A crude wooden box is fastened to its side, and tied around its neck is a small bell dented and dull, but it jingles faintly as it moves. Behind it, a man appears, wrapped in sealskin and dragging a sled loaded with parcels. Posti on Sapina, he says with a chuckle. Welcome to 13th century Finland. This was not a land built for ease. The population was sparse, roads were practically non-existent, and winter wasn't a season, it was a lifestyle. That's where the moose came in. Now, let's be clear, nobody set out thinking. Historians still debate whether he raised the moose out of charity and sanity or because he lost a bet, but raised it he did. The moose wasn't just strong, it was smart. It could learn paths. It remembered faces. Suddenly, a wild idea took root. What if moose weren't just a forest hazard? What if they were the future of Finnish communication? Of course, not everyone was convinced, but others saw potential. You move with the man and his moose now, following a narrow track where the trees bend low from the snow's weight. The light fades slowly. As you walk, he tells you stories. There was the time a moose outran a pack of wolves while delivering a marriage proposal. Ollie pauses to adjust the leather straps and gives the moose a gentle pat. In your hands, you hold one of the letters, stiff parchment folded and sealed in dark green wax, and honestly, they usually did. You keep walking, snow crunching underfoot, the bells jingle echoing softly. Somewhere behind you, the trees have already covered your footprints. And just like that, as the sky turns from lavender to navy and the stars begin to prick through the gloom, you feel that subtle shift. But tonight, it lives again. You wake up with your back against a tree and snowflakes on your eyelashes. The moose is still there, snoozing gently, its breath rising in little clouds that catch the early light. Ollie's already up, sipping something warm from a birch bark cup. You stretch, joints popping, and start walking again. I do love you, but your family smells like boiled cabbage. You know, the classics. You're moving backward now, not in space, but in time. Further from that leather-strapped moose and closer to a moment when Finland had no idea what it was doing with messages at all. And herders depending heavily on weather, luck, and whether you were afraid of being eaten by wolves that day. See, the funny thing about postal systems is that they tend to be built where people are. And in medieval Finland, people were anywhere. The villages were so scattered you could shout across a frozen lake and your echo might answer, but not another human being. Still, people had things to say. Sometimes important things. There's a bear in the grain stores. Mikko has the plague again. But delivering those messages? A nightmare. The air is sharp and clean, the snow glows faintly in the moonlight. And there's a rhythm to Carla's movement like a human metronome echoing across centuries. There were no formal roads, not even paths in the usual sense, just seasonal trails made by hunters. Carlo vanishes into it with a shout, and you're left blinking as snow coats your eyelashes and your breath feels thick. So before Moose, Finland relied on two types of couriers, the desperate, and the delusional nothing. You start to wonder how anyone in this world managed to communicate anything at all. Then you spot it, the edge of a fur mitten sticking out of a snowdrift. You're in the village of Nalkajärvi, which loosely translates to Hunger Lake. Accurate. A man named Carlo is tying a scrap of cloth to a stick and muttering something that sounds like a prayer or a complaint. You drag him out, laughing nervously, and he clutches the message like it's a newborn puppy. He's wearing skis primitive, wooden, curved at the tips, and he's preparing to cross 70 kilometers of ice and snow to deliver a single note. There are oral stories, vague records, and a few 14th century scribbles that suggest someone somewhere thought it was a good idea. His skis creak, and the silence around you is so absolute that even your heartbeat feels rude. And for a brief moment, you imagine it a lone moose, antlers like tree branches, trotting calmly across the landscape with a message tucked in its harness. They say the Sami could teach them to carry tools ... even small loads. Let's take you to one of them. His reward? A cup of fish broth and possibly frostbite. You wonder, maybe the reason mail systems didn't work in Finland for so long wasn't because of a lack of effort. Maybe it was the land itself saying, no thanks. You try to talk him out of it. And a stubborn sense of innovation just weird enough to work. He gestures to the scrap of parchment in your hand. That message is for my daughter, he says. She's getting married. She needs to know I'm not dead. They remember where the forest bends. She listens to the story, nods once, and says something strange. Fair enough. You follow him for a while through brittle reeds and over a frozen marsh. It's slow going. But there's something beautiful about it, too. That's when the snowstorm hits. No warning, no drama, just sudden whiteness, like someone dropped a curtain between you and the rest of the world. You stumble toward the last place you saw him, calling his name. Carlo's alive, just buried. You sit together under a half-fallen tree, trying to get a fire going, and he tells you something curious. Sometimes, he says, the old ones used elk. Not just for meat. You raise an eyebrow. Like mail? He shrugs, maybe. Historians still debate whether Sami communities truly trained moose or simply tolerated their presence. You look out at the snow-covered plain. The wind has stopped. It's almost peaceful again. No skis, no snow blindness. No panic, just purpose. Back in Alkajärvi, once you've helped Carlo finish his ill-advised journey, an elder greets you with what might be a smile or a scowl frozen in place by age. You know, she whispers, moose never forget paths. You blink. Sorry? They don't need trails, she says. You don't quite know what that means, but you file it away under weird old people wisdom, right next to never trust a fox near butter and dreams shared in smoke last longer. That night, while curled in a pile of furs and half-frozen boots, until someone asks the moose instead, you fall asleep to the sound of distant howling and the smell of dried fish stew wafting from a clay pot. One day, this land will invent saunas, phone companies, and high-speed icebreakers, but for now it has moose. And a stubborn sense of innovation just weird enough to work. It's morning again, if you can call this gray hush morning. The sun barely lifts itself over the trees before slumping back behind the clouds like it's hungover. You stretch beside a fire that's more smoke than flame. Ollie hands you a flat biscuit that tastes like pine bark and disappointment. Today, he says, brushing snow from the moose's saddle, we tell the story. You blink at him. Which story? He smiles like he's heard something funny that you haven't yet. The first moose post. There's no plaque, no monument. No commemorative stamp with antlers on it. Just a frostbitten memory passed through generations, told beside crackling fires and smoke-filled huts. The forest part's just enough to let the wind nip your nose and whisper in your ears. And yet, there it is, the legend of the first letter carried by moose. But there were no messengers, no horses, no time. Just a half-tame moose named Vane who had a habit of following Ilpo to the outhouse. You set out toward the village of Yutkowski, Ollie leading the way, the moose trailing with gentle thuds in the snow. The village is mostly smoke and angles roofs bent with snow, chimneys sighing, doorways tucked behind firs and pine branches. An old woman named Aniki greets Ollie with a grunt and invites you into a low wooden hut that smells like pine tar and boiled onions. They slapped the moose on the rump and hoped for the best. Ollie's story starts like all good Finnish stories with a disaster. No records, no seals. No verification, just whispered stories and a carved wooden panel in the village sauna depicting Bean the messenger, looking slightly heroic and slightly bewildered. She talks as you sip about how the moose weren't trained so much as tolerated. You didn't teach them routes. You just gave them a reason to walk. Not in a straight line, of course. He stopped for smacks, stared at trees, and almost picked a fight with a raven. But 2 days later, Lisa opened her door to find Vivin on her doorstep, snorting steam and chewing moss with a slightly damp message flapping at his side. A fisherman named Ilpo had fallen through the ice. His daughter, Lisa, lived 2 days north and needed to be warned. She made it to her father's side. Outside, the moose shifts its weight and snorts at a raven in the snow. One story tells of a moose that swallowed a marriage proposal and delivered only the ring. The ceiling is low and the furs smell like old onions and mystery, but it's warm. And before you drift off, you hear her humming a song something about antlers and fate, the rhythm slow and soothing. One memorable attempt ended with a moose trampling the village bread oven, leaving a trail of hoof-shaped dough pancakes behind. That couple still got married, but they named their first son Antler out of spite. Moose magic? An act of God, or just one very confused ungulate? The villages began training their own moose. Not for everyday letters, just the important ones. Deaths, births. Announcements of dangerous weather or early harvests. News worth the trouble of strapping to a very large animal with no sense of urgency. But they're steady. And sometimes in a country where the weather can kill you and the maps are mostly guesswork, steady is enough. Ilpo survived. Desperate, Lisa's uncle scrawled a warning onto birch bark, shoved it into a leather pouch, and tied it to Veen's neck with a piece of twine. And here's the miracle. The moose went. She got the warning. Was it luck? Historians still debate whether this event actually happened. You reach Yutkowski just as the clouds begin to unload soft flakes from the sky. Inside, she opens a chest and pulls out something remarkable. A moose harness. Leather cracked and worn with polished bone clasps and a faded symbol stamped into strap, a crude drawing of antlers crossed over a scroll. Belonged to Vani, she says, gently brushing off decades of dust. Or his grandson. Hard to say. You sit beside the hearth as Nikki pours something warm into a clay mug. It smells like fermented berries and has the consistency of lukewarm gravy. Feed them enough, treat them kind, she says, and they might come back. It wasn't glamorous. Letters got wet. Sometimes they were chewed. There were plenty of failures. Moose wandered into frozen lakes. Some ate the message. Still, there was something about the idea that stuck. You poke at the fire and the warmth finally starts to reach your fingers. Looking at it now, calm, steady, almost regal, you kind of get it. Moose aren't fast. They're not particularly obedient. That night, you sleep in Aniki's loft. And as the wind rattles outside and the moose shifts in its sleep beneath your window, you think about that first message. How it was never meant to work. And how it did anyway. You leave Yuchkowski at dawn, though. Dawn is really just the darkness turning a slightly lighter shade of gray. Snowflakes flurry sideways in the wind, and the world looks like it was painted in only two colors, white and tree. Ollie follows behind, and you, in the middle, are the reluctant filling in a very cold sandwich. The moose, this one named Sissy, plods ahead, unbothered. Today, the forest is quieter than usual. Even the birds seem to have called in sick. You trudge on, boots cracking through the crusted snow, and Ollie begins to talk not about legends this time, but about logistics. Because let us be honest, the idea of using moose to deliver mail sounds like someone dared a drunk uncle to make a bet and never expected him to follow through. Even the Danes had slave routes. But Finland? Finland looked around at its frozen bogs, mountainous pine forests, and the occasional troll-shaped rock and said, you know what would make sense here? A wild, 1,200-pound forest cow with anxiety issues. And yet, here we are. By the late 1200s, neighboring regions had already adopted more conventional systems. Sweden and Novgorod had their messengers on horseback. So the great debate began. Moose versus horse has been carrying messages since the Bronze Age, but not ideal in thigh-deep snow. Terrified of wolves and known to freeze solid when left unattended. She stood still for 10 minutes, blinked twice, then wandered off to eat bark. Let's lay out the contenders. Either way, it marks a turning point in the lore. Horses might have had the speed. But Moose? Moose had tenacity. The horse, reliable, trainable. He's wearing the harness now, little more sophisticated than Vin's from the old tailies. Straps loop under his belly, pouches hang from each flank, and small carved runes are sewn into the leather. The moose, native to the land, always walks straighter when he's carrying a love letter, born with built-in snowshoes. Two animals are lined up again, a broad-chested reindeer snorting and stamping, and a moose whose antlers are adorned with bells and painted birchwood charms. Immune to cold, they have. Moods, preferences. Some like to walk early in the morning, others hate ravens. One famous delivery moose named Risto refused to cross bridges unless someone sang to him, loudly in Swedish. Of course it was, he says. They're stubborn, proud. They'll follow a trail until the end of the world, but only if they want to. They had to. Horses died. In the quiet, you think back to all the things humans have tried over history. Pigeons, drums, semaphore towers, Morse code. But here in this wild, frozen corner of the world, they turned to something ancient, wild, and stubbornly majestic. People froze, the moose didn't care. They didn't love us, didn't hate us. They just were. Also temperamental, selectively deaf, and prone to licking strangers. Ollie claims that in 1303, the village of Kivaladi staged a contest to settle the debate once and for all. It was snowing. Of course it was. Two couriers were given identical letters, identical starting points, and identical winter coats. One rode a horse named Tapio, the other guided a moose named Marta. The race began with great fanfare. The horse launched forward like an arrow, hooves pounding across the ice. The moose? Everyone declared the horse the winner until he fell through a frozen stream an hour later, had to be pulled out by 6 people and a priest, and never completed the route. Marta, meanwhile, showed up at the target village a day late, soaking wet and missing part of the letter, but still technically delivered it. Historians still debate whether this race was an actual event or just an exaggerated village tale told after too much fermented turnip wine. You pause to watch Sisu munching frost-covered lichen off a tree stump. He likes poetry, Ollie says, pointing to one pouch. You raise a skeptical eyebrow. Ollie shrugs. Maybe he's just nosy. There's no denying it, though. The more time you spend around these animals, the more you realize they're not simply beasts of burden. You come upon a frozen clearing where a group of villagers has gathered bundled in wool and squinting against the wind. The debate continues. One man shouts, reindeer are easier to steer. Another yells, moose don't need steering. The argument escalates until someone throws a snowball. You quietly step back as tradition is upheld. Small town chaos, flurries flying, someone yelling about potatoes. Eventually, peace is restored through hot berry juice, and the moose wins the informal contest by walking away with both deliveries while everyone else is still arguing. That night, back by the fire, you ask Ollie the obvious question, wasn't he a nightmare trying to train a moose? He leans back, his beard catching tiny sparks from the flames. But they still use them? He nods. Outside, you hear Sisu shift again, his antlers brushing against the canvas of the tent. You sip from a wooden mug. The warmth sinks into your hands. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't elegant. But somehow it worked. You wake to the soft sound of hooves thudding gently against packed snow. It takes a second to remember where you are bundled under reindeer pelts, breath visible, toes numb. As you walk alongside Ollie, he tells you about what came after the first moose deliveries, the odd successes, the legends, the laughable failures, at some point, the chaos needed. Structure. You stretch, crawl out of the tent, and there's Sisu already up, plotting a lazy circle near the embers of last night's fire. This morning's journey leads to a younger settlement, a place called Kurjanimi, perched on the edge of a frozen lake that mirrors the pale sky. It was like someone had announced a new fashion trend and the countryside decided to cosplay as a post office. Their legs are too long, their ears too twitchy, and their moods unpredictable, which honestly tracks. Because once word spread that moose could carry messages well, everyone wanted in. Every village, every distant farmstead, every isolated family in the woods wanted their own antlered postman. A third stares into your soul like it knows your browser history. Others just wander off mid-task and never come back. One infamous dropout named Kiliki apparently joined a herd of wild reindeer and was later spotted leading them into a frozen bakery. She sniffs, steps closer, and sneezes directly into your face. You consider this a success. But you can't just slap a pouch on a moose and expect it to navigate 3 days of snowdrifts and cranky farmers. Training became necessary. And that's where the antlered apprenticeships began. You're not breaking them, you're inviting them into a very weird partnership. Merritt tells you of a moose named Tapani who refused to walk through villages unless he was wearing a flower crown. Another named Ansa had a habit of stealing mittens mid-delivery and hiding them in hay bales. She tosses you a bucket of dried moss and tells you if you can get one of them to eat out of your hand, you're halfway to postal glory. Moose are scent-driven creatures. They don't read maps, but they remember smells. Pine, wood smoke, even individual herbs. One trainer once swore his moose only delivered letters to people who cooked with dill. Just leaned on the latch until it clicked. Kurjanimi's small lodge sits beside a tall pine enclosure, where 5 young moose calves bound awkwardly in the snow like giant toddlers on stilts. You're led by a woman named Merritt, small, wiry, and deeply unimpressed by most things, but came back. She shrugs. Mail was late, still arrived. She's curled beside the fence, chewing sleepily, eyes half closed. You scratch behind her ears, and she grunts in approval. They're fed by hand, walk daily, exposed to noise, bells, and eventually the sacred postal pouch. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft and lazy. You step into the enclosure. Immediately, one calf sprints in the opposite direction. Another licks your elbow and then headbutts a log. It's a quiet moment, a stillness made holy by how unlikely it is. You've just become part of something that existed on the very edge of plausibility. This is moose school. Merritt explains that calves are captured young either orphans or rescued after injury and raised in proximity to humans. Not tamed exactly, just tolerated. Not every moose makes the cut. Some are too aggressive. Most important, Merritt says, is to bond. You crouch by a shy calf named Tuli, gently offering the moss. There's a rhythm to training. They start with weight small bags filled with soft cloth, then longer walks over familiar routes, then scent training. As the weeks pass, the bond between handler and moose is built through food, patience, and a kind of stubborn companionship. You sit beside the training paddock, watching the calves awkwardly rear and wrestle. Historians still debate whether this level of training truly counted as domestication, or if it was just a long-running, slightly delusional experiment in hope and persistence. You lean back in the snow, watching one calf slowly eat your glove. And here's the odd thing, it worked more often than it should have. Tuli finally approaches again. This time she nibbles the moss straight from your palm, her warm breath fogging the air between you. Later, in the warming hut, you sip warm berry broth and listen as Merritt scrolls through her mental library of antlered apprentices past. There was one, she says, who learned to open gates. Didn't run off? Did you both laugh? The fire crackles. Before you turn in for the night, you check on Tuli one last time. You whisper, "You're going to be a terrible mail carrier, aren't you?" She yawns. And somehow that feels like agreement. The next day, the cold is the kind that chews through your coat and threatens to steal your fingers if you stop moving. The sun is doing its best impression of a lit match in a blizzard technically present, but not really helping. You've left Kurjanini behind, trudging south with Ollie and a new companion, Tuomas, a bull moose who's seen a few winters and clearly doesn't care what you think of him. He walks like he owns the forest, pausing only to huff dramatically at the wind. His harness creaks with every step. It was mostly improvised gear, stitched from whatever could survive frost, wind, and occasionally moose drool. Today, you'll see what it really looks like to put a message on a moose and hope for the best. Because now it's time to learn about the hardware sleds, straps, and stubborn hooves. The early moose mail system wasn't sleek. It wasn't elegant. You arrive at a supply outpost, a sagging log building in the woods, surrounded by barrels, ropes, and a suspicious number of broken sled runners. Inside, a burly man named Jarmo waves you in and proudly unveils the latest design, a narrow wooden sled, just big enough for 2 sacks of mail, 1 terrified apprentice, and about 7 regrets. He calls it the Moose Mobile. It looks dangerous. Lightweight pine, birch runners, low profile. He snorts once, looks back at you with what can only be described as moose side-eye, and waits. Built for balance, Jarmo says, puffing his chest. He shrugs, more of a lurching shuffle like a drunk nobleman on stilts. But then Tuomas picks up speed and suddenly you're gliding. Trees blare past, the wind stings your cheeks, and the harness creaks in a rhythm that sounds almost musical. It's exhilarating and mildly terrifying. Tuomas moves with purpose, hooves crunching like drums through the forest. Lightning accident. Don't worry about it. You point to a scorch mark on the side. To be fair, you do too. You panic. Ollie doesn't blink. The moose reappears on the other side of a fallen log, triumphant and smug. Tuomas eyes the sled suspiciously. You land hard. Your teeth rattle. A bird in a nearby tree flaps away in protest. Tuomas doesn't care. The harness is surprisingly well crafted. Straps cross over the moose's back and under the chest, distributing weight evenly. These are the markers that guide the moose, not maps, not compasses, but memory and repetition. Either way, the system had a bizarre consistency. Mail might not arrive on time or dry or even intact, but it arrived. Mailbags hang on either side, secured with knots passed down through generations of very nervous postal workers. You don't steer a moose, he says, grinning. You negotiate. And maybe, just maybe, he doesn't mind you. One letter smells faintly of fermented herring, but that might be the paper's fault. An old man accepts a letter with tears in his eyes. And yes, the saddle has a cup holder, probably not original, but appreciated. Horses who froze mid-stride. Letters that never came. But now? There's a chance, not a guarantee. Not a promise. You use a chunk of pine to rub the runners smooth again, and Ollie tightens the straps on the harness. Just a quiet mark of a quiet system. Jarmo hands you the reins, which are really more of a suggestion than a control mechanism. You try not to look terrified as Thomas is hitched to the sled. Ollie climbs into the sled beside you, bundles a few letters into a pouch, and mutters something to Thomas in Finnish that sounds vaguely like a prayer. And then, with one grunt from Jarmo, you're off. The movement is not what you expect. It's not fast, not at first. The sled's runners skim over the snow with surprising grace. Where's he going? You shout over the wind. Ollie shrugs. He knows the trail. Comforting. As you skid around a bend, the sled hits a bump and goes airborne for half a second. You pass landmarks along the way. A stone shaped like a sleeping bear, a crooked birch tree marked with old red dye. At one point, Thomas veers off trail, plunging into a deeper patch of snow. Apparently, detours are part of the system. Historians still debate whether the moose truly understood their routes, or if they simply followed their noses and got lucky. Eventually, midway through the journey, you stop for a break. Ollie checks the mail pouch. Only a little damp, he says, approvingly. Thomas munches on frozen berries and refuses to make eye contact. Jarmo's sled is still intact, which is a small miracle. That's when a peculiar thing happens. Thomas leans into you. Not much, just a nudge. But enough to remind you that, for all his size and stubbornness, he knows who you are. You finish the route by mid-afternoon, gliding into a village where a small crowd has gathered to cheer. Children wave branches with bells tied to them. From my niece, he says. 3 weeks late. But perfect timing. Ollie hands you a piece of birch bark with a stamp burned into it, an old symbol, 2 antlers curled around a scroll. It's not official, not government-sanctioned. Before the moose, there were messengers who died on the trail, just a chance. And in a land where winter is longer than memory, that is enough. You unhook Thomas, brush snow from his back, and give him a piece of dried lichen wrapped in oats. He eats it with slow approval. That night, you sleep in a hayloft, warm and sore and half-frozen. Outside, the moose rests beneath the stars, a leather pouch still tied to his side, just in case. You wake to the muffled sound of ice shifting deep, groaning, ancient. It's like the earth itself is turning over in its sleep. You pull your cloak tighter and peer out the loft window. Below, Thomas is already awake, steam curling from his nostrils like he's a very large kettle with legs. Today's route is unusual. You're heading across one of Finland's many frozen lakes, a path that exists only in the heart of winter, when the water becomes a solid road beneath your feet. And yes, you'll be riding the moose. Ollie appears at your side with 2 cups of warm something and a look that says he's either proud of you or preparing to witness a hilarious accident. Time to test your balance, he says, handing you the reins. It feels like you're about to board a woolly antlered boat that may or may not throw you off if you sneeze too loud. This is Lake Isogjarvi, a wide silver sheet stretching to the horizon. Underneath, it's 50 feet of frozen stillness. Above, nothing but wind and sky. No sled today. Just you, a saddle rigged with padded rolls, and a postal pouch fastened securely across Tomas's flank. You clamber up, awkward but determined. Thomas sighs heavily as if to say, here we go again. And then you're off trotting down the snowy slope, hooves crunching against the trail until suddenly the sound changes. You're on ice now. Where carts got stuck, sleighs slowed, and horses panicked, moose thrived. And not just any ice. And an uncanny ability to sense weak ice before stepping on it. At first, Thomas walks cautiously, each step carefully placed. You hold your breath. The ice creaks, but it holds. No birds, no trees, just the soft groaning beneath your feet and the endless sheet of winter stretching in all directions. Then, with a snort, Thomas picks up speed and you realize something astonishing. Others say they just followed the scent of lichen across the breeze. Behind you, the moose's hooves clatter like distant drums, and ahead nothing but white, but moose? Moose had instincts. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel like you're flying. He's skating. But there's a rhythm to it. Each hoof step glides just a little farther, smoother, more confident. It's almost graceful. Almost. Okay, not like a figure skater. There are no triple axels or sparkly costumes. He catches himself, studies, and snorts like it was your fault. He flicks his ears like he's annoyed by your joy, but you swear he's enjoying himself too. From this angle, it's hard to believe you ever moved across it at all. One of the letters inside is sealed with ribbon and smells faintly of pine soap. Slowly, patiently, and with just enough madness to say, and you sit cross-legged on a log, holding a crinkled envelope addressed in runes to a village you've never heard of, thinking, somehow this is all working. You know what we need? An antlered courier. A love note, probably. You wonder if the recipient knows how many moose hooves it took to get here. You're moving fast now. The wind whips your face, numbing your cheeks, turning your eyelashes to icicles. Trees rise around you again, tall, sharp silhouettes against the sky. You dismount with a thud, knees wobbling, teeth chattering. You can't help it. You laugh, loud, wild, and freezing. And the moose? This, it turns out, was one of the great advantages of moose mail, forward momentum on ice. They were built for this. Long legs for deep snow, sharp hooves for icy traction. You reach the halfway point of the lake and stop for a moment. The silence is thick. Ollie catches up on skis, pulling a small sled of extra mail. He points at Tuomas, winded but calm. Better than my brother's reindeer, he says. That one tried to swim. You ask how common lake crossings were in medieval Finland, and Ollie tells you they were both feared and prized. Quicker in theory, deadly in practice. Historians still debate whether moose actually preferred the ice routes or simply tolerated them out of habit. Some claim they were guided by the wind. You continue across the lake, wind at your back, picking up speed again. The saddle creaks. The ice sings low notes beneath you. Then Tuomas skids. Not much, just one back hoof, sliding out half a step too far. Your heart leaps into your throat. You lean forward. Show off, you mutter. By midday, you reach the far shore. Tuomas shakes off the snow and struts into the pines like he's just performed on stage. You build a small fire near the edge. Eat dried sausage that tastes vaguely of shoe and warm your hands while Ollie checks the nail satchels. Not a bad crossing, Ollie says, rubbing frost from his beard. You nod, eyes still skinning the glassy surface of the lake behind you. And that's part of the magic, isn't it? The people who lived in this land understood the rhythm of snow and ice. They didn't try to conquer it, they worked with it. The fire pops. Tuomas grumbles in his sleep. And not because someone built a perfect system, but because a moose decided not to walk the other way. The path through the forest after the lake feels narrower than before, like the trees are leaning in to listen. Tuomas ambles forward without a hint of hurry, occasionally stopping to nose at a snowdrift or stare off into the pines like he's waiting for a philosophical breakthrough. You ask Ollie why it's called that. Today's route leads you into one of the more densely wooded parts of the territory, a patch of land once referred to in old maps as Verjokua, the Shadow Lane. He shrugs. Too many trees, not enough light. Your thighs are plotting a rebellion, and your back has filed a formal complaint. But you're starting to feel a strange pride, too, like you've passed some invisible test. There's no cliff or monster or musical number, just ... A subtle thing. The familiar grooves in the snow vanish. The red-dyed birch tree markers are missing, and Tuomas has stopped walking. The sun is low, the wind is picking up, and your last snack was a stick of cheese that crunched suspiciously. But here's the thing the moose knows. Moose love it. Like a mail-carrying oracle. Or a really big dog that knows you're too incompetent to be in charge. You pass landmarks that Ollie clearly doesn't recognize. A tree split by lightning. A boulder shaped like a bear's backside. A stump with a pair of mittens frozen to it. Which, frankly, raises more questions than answers. Still, the quiet here is different. Deeper. Even the birds are whispering. Somewhere behind you, a woodpecker taps with a sort of slow rhythm that makes you feel like he is bored but doing his job anyway. You shift in the saddle, grateful for the extra padding. You're pretty sure you heard a wolf in the distance, or it was a snow-covered tree squeaking like an accordion. Hard to say. A wooden sign hangs above the door, swaying gently in the wind, Yorish Crossing. That's when the trail disappears. Not dramatically. He turns his head back towards you with a look that says, you messed up, not me. At the moose, at the mail pouch. Researchers still debate whether it's the Earth's magnetic fields, scent trails, or sheer stubbornness that lets them find their way. But in medieval Finland, they were practically mythical for it. Villagers believed moose could smell home even from leagues away. Huh, he says, in the tone of a man who rarely says huh. You glance at Ollie, who skids to a stop on his skis and frowns. He laughs. Do I look like a moose to you? Not fast. Not always accurate. But built on trust. Ooh, a wedding invitation 4 years late. That'll go in the almost happy pile. Warnings delivered after the danger had passed. He collects letters, ones that got returned, misdelivered, or were never claimed. His cabin is stacked floor to ceiling with envelopes, some centuries old, most smelling of mildew and elderberry. It tastes like moss and disappointment, but it's warm. Just tuck it into your coat and step back outside. Did we take the wrong fork, you ask? About hoof prints in the snow that melt before anyone ever sees them. Possibly. Which is, as far as you can tell, finished for absolutely, but I refuse to panic. Now, being lost in a medieval Finnish forest is not ideal. Tuomas lowers his head, sniffs the snow, and begins walking not fast, not slow, just with intention. Moose had an uncanny sense of direction. Modern moose still do. You're about to put that theory to the test. For the next hour, Tuomas leads you through a maze of snow-laden spruce. At one point, you spot a crude wooden post in the snow-weathered and barely upright. Ollie skis over and reads the carving aloud. To the old well, don't drink it. Comforting. You start to doubt, just a little. The forest is darker now, shadows stretching long and blue across the trail. And then suddenly, a cabin. Tuomas stops at the edge of a clearing as if to say, Tada. It's a small structure sagging under years of frost and moss. With a slanted roof and smoke curling faintly from the chimney, Ollie smiles. We're not lost. He knocks twice, and an old man opens the door shirtless, wearing nothing but fur trousers and an expression of absolute disinterest. He stares at you, then says, You're late. Joe is what some might call a forest archivist. Others might call him a mail hoarder. You step inside while Tuomas dozes outside, his breath fogging up a small window. Jurja makes tea. You hand over a bundle of mail, and he flips through it with one eye half closed. Turns out Jurja keeps an unofficial archive of failed correspondence, love letters that never reached their sweethearts. Decrees that became irrelevant. People forget, he says, stirring his tea with a birch twig, that letters are promises. And promises can wait a long time. You ask if he's ever tried delivering them himself. You don't answer. As you sit by the fire, sipping moss water and listening to the wind drum against the shutters, you realize how delicate this whole system really was. The trust that someone somewhere would care enough to keep moving forward through snow, ice, and forests filled with bears and weird stumps. The trust that the moose would know where to go. Before you leave, Jurja hands you an old letter unsealed, addressed only with the words for whoever needs it. You read it by the firelight. It's a poem about waiting. About seasons passing. You don't say anything. Tuomas is ready. And the trail miraculously is clear again. You arrive at the next stop covered in snow, oat dust, and a sense of mild betrayal. Tuomas, however, looks radiant, his antlers frosted like a holiday centerpiece, his breath curling into perfect little clouds. If he could smirk, he would. The lodge ahead looks like it was built by someone who once saw a drawing of a house but didn't have fully believe in corners. It leans to the left or the right. It's hard to say because you're pretty sure your boots are frozen unevenly. The kind that seeps into your bones and forgives you for that thing you said to a pine tree on the last hill. A rusted sign creaks above the doorway. Porogya Posti, the reindeer and mail. Inside, it's warm. A miracle kind of warm. They glance up when you enter, clocking your posture, your soggy gloves, and the glorious beast behind you. There's a group of couriers already there, sitting on crates, oiling straps, one snoring softly against a sack of turnips. Another moose recruit? One says, squinting. The tradition here, passed down like an old winter coat, is to share one road story before you leave. Doesn't matter if it's true. Reckless, adds another. But noble. You nod the way someone nods when they don't want to admit their animal made all the decisions. They invite you to sit by the fire. Someone offers you boiled bark. It's chewy. Moose roots crisscross it like veins. Someone's drawn tiny antlers beside each checkpoint. Tuomas snorts proudly when he sees it. This is the Handoff Lodge, an official way station where mail gets sorted, logs get updated, and moose get compliments. Ollie tells one about a moose who outran a landslide, then delivered a marriage proposal and caught a fish before breakfast. Everyone nods solemnly. No one questions it. Historians still debate whether this specific lodge was government-sanctioned or just tolerated. Either way, it was essential. Routes needed anchors. Couriers needed soup. You watch as a girl no older than 12 quietly organizes letters by region. Her fingers move faster than yours can think. She doesn't look up once. You wonder how many have passed through here before you sleepy-eyed, half-frozen, hauling messages no one else could carry. There's a map on the far wall. You stay the night. You dream of paper birds, cold stars, and snow that whispers in a language only hoofbeats can answer. Thomas plods along as if he owns the snow-covered earth beneath him, and to be fair, he kind of does. At least for the next few kilometers. You rock gently in the saddle, your mind settling into that quiet, rhythmic lull, part moose meditation, part snow hypnosis. Not a cartwheel, a water wheel. Just ... out here. In the middle of nowhere. Around a bend, the trees part again, revealing something unexpected. A clearing dotted with wooden stumps, and in the center, an enormous, rotting wheel. You squint. Ollie, are we hallucinating? Nope. That's the lost mill of Lentilati. Of course it is. They dreamed of turning the Moose postal system into a finely tuned, water-powered network. Ollie explains that sometime in the late 1200s, a group of overambitious monks attempted to build a fully functioning mail processing center here in the woods. Their idea? Strap the mail to floating logs, ride the rivers, and let the water wheel do the sorting. It was visionary, also completely ridiculous. Because, as it turns out, water freezes. And logs carrying letters tend to get stuck, or eaten by beavers. The air grows warmer for just a moment, cradled by the trees, and then you smell it. You silently agree. Moose make better postmen than frozen logs. Any day. Historians still debate whether the project ever made it past its planning stage, but the mill itself was built by hand, abandoned when the second winter froze the entire contraption solid. Nestled in the hollow of a snow basin, camouflaged under brush and thick smoke, a cluster of wooden lean-tos and a fire pit surrounded by courier folk riders, skiers, even a few on snowshoes. You see a reindeer dozing, a pair of dogs snoring, a man roasting something unidentifiable over the fire and humming a lullaby that's mostly just the word potato repeated melodically. Camp ahead. Probably the Hassa relay. Another claims they delivered a letter to a haunted mill, where the recipient had been dead for 30 years but signed for it anyway. Thomas snorts as you ride past the ruins, his breath fogging around the skeletal wheel like he's mocking the entire concept. Either way, it warms your hands, and your stomach, and eventually your soul, a halfway point of sorts more rumor than location. Some say it's always moving. Others say it only appears to moose and those deemed worthy by the postal spirits, which is... Thomas looks up, unimpressed. Vague and also possibly a side effect of inhaling too much pine sap. As the clearing fades behind you, the trees thicken again, forming a dense wall of pines so symmetrical it feels artificial, like the forest is politely guiding your path. Smoke, not from fire. From people, a cooking fire. Maybe two. Along the way, nature called urgently, and Tapio, flustered, placed the royal decree atop a snow-covered bench. This is the good stuff. You can't learn it in books. You tie it to Thomas's harness. He seems okay with that. Like you've eaten too much wisdom and now have to carry it uphill. You glance back at Ollie, who raises a brow. On clear days of 5 villages, 2 lakes, and one suspiciously shaped boulder that locals swear is a troll who fell asleep mid-argument, not just a rider, a courier, a keeper of absurd traditions, a temporary guardian of weird, frozen knowledge. The Hassa relay is one of those legendary pit stops known among Finnish couriers. You rub your hands together, trying to ignore the numbness in your fingers. The wind bites again, sharper now. Testing your resolve, but here it is. But every counselor who touched it allegedly came down with something called decree itch. The camp is warm, chaotic, and smells vaguely like smoked trout and wet wool. Thomas immediately wanders toward a bucket of frozen turnips and helps himself. Nobody stops him. Apparently, moose eat free here. But the story lives on. There is even a carved plaque in that village commemorating Tapios, resilience and reckless bravery in the face of digestive emergencies. You're offered a seat near the fire and a wooden bowl of what might be stew or might be a hot beverage trying to be soup. As you eat, you listen. Everyone here has a story. One courier tells of a fox that followed them for 2 days, waiting for them to fall over. Someone mentions the ghost moose of the north. Then a woman older than the rest, wrapped in more scarves than should be physically possible, leans in and tells a tale in a hushed voice. That time the king's messenger dropped the royal decree in a latrine. You choke on your soup. According to her, back in 1346, a young courier named Tapia was tasked with delivering a sealed parchment from the Swedish crown to a village council. Cue wind. Cue tragic flutter. Cue one very undignified fishing attempt into a half-frozen pit. The decree was recovered, dried, re-waxed, and delivered on time. Historians still debate whether this was superstition or early dramatitis. Ollie leans over. You smile, sip the last of your almost soup, and realize you've started to feel like part of something. Before leaving camp, you trade a spare pair of socks for a talisman, a tiny wooden moose carved from pine. Back on the trail, the fire is still glowing behind you. You feel heavier and lighter at the same time, which, conveniently, is what's next. You ascend slowly along a snow-packed slope that leads to the roof of the region, an old ridgeline that offers a view. Tuomas moves with a purposeful rhythm, hooves crunching into the slope, breath rising in slow puffs. At the top, you pause. Below, in the valley, a scattering of lights glows like stars fallen into the snow. A village. Your next stop. The journey isn't over, not yet, but in that moment you feel it. The moose. The mail. The cold. The comedy. And your place in the strange, stubborn relay that somehow holds it all together. Tuomas pauses at the ridge, his breath puffing in steady clouds, and you take a moment to appreciate the view. Down in the valley below, little cottages blink their lanterns through the pine, a constellation of warm lights scattered in deep snow. The place is called Korpijärvi, which roughly translates to Forest Lake, though the lake is frozen solid and the forest seems to be losing the argument. You gently pat Tuomas's thick neck. He snorts, which you now interpret as polite moose language for. Ollie zigzags ahead on skis, tossing back advice like, lean forward a little. And if you fall, scream something dramatic. Let's get this over with. So down you go. The descent is trickier than it looks. Tuomas knows his footing, but the path is narrow and the slope likes to flirt with gravity. Korpijärvi isn't large, but it is one of those tight-knit northern places where every building looks like it has a secret tunnel. And every person over 50 owns at least one axe. You ride into the main path as quietly as possible, hooves muffled by snow, and are greeted by an old woman carrying a broom and wearing a shawl patterned with moose antlers. You don't fall, but you do nearly slide sideways into a suspicious birch tree that you reconvinced moved slightly to mock you. Not years later, this one's smaller, tied with red string. The man eyes the seal and tucks it into a wooden drawer under the counter like it as precious. It might be. It might also be a bundle of pressed moss and a joke. No one questions the contents of mail this far north. At the base of the slope, the village awaits. He flips to the Tyrvant section, finds your name well. Your stand-in name for this expedition, and nods with all the ceremony of a knighting. Postal delivery? She asks, not looking up from her sweeping. The bell of Henko, they call it, an ancient bronze bell once strapped to a prized courier moose during a legendary storm journey in 1382. The moose, named Veen, reportedly delivered 16 letters through 3 blizzards, 2 ice lakes, and 1 accidental wedding. The bell rang the whole way. There's word of a storm building over the eastern ridge. Might stall us if we don't move soon. Postal delivery, Ollie confirms. The moose gods are never satisfied until you've had your eyebrows frozen at least once. It reverberates in your chest as if whispering welcome to the brotherhood, or maybe just don't forget your pants. You and Ollie are invited into a cottage for coffee, which turns out to be more like caffeinated tar, but somehow exactly what you need. Good, she says, sweeping once more, then turning to waddle back inside without another word. There's something deeply Finnish about that entire exchange. He's either unimpressed or he's heard better bells. The village has a postal hut, not an official post office, but a warm, smoky lean-to attached to a sauna. Because why not combine two sacred institutions? Inside, a man with impressive sideburns and an even more impressive mustache logs your arrival in a book thicker than your thigh. The sky is darker now, but the trail forward still glows faintly in the reflected starlight. Thomas huffs. He's ready. Or at least not unwilling. Package? He asks. The village feels like it's pulling the sky down over its head like a wool blanket. A few villagers wander toward the sauna, their bare arms steaming in the cold, muttering things like Tuesday again and remember the goat this time. You reach into the satchel and hand over a tightly wrapped bundle. You'll want to see the moose bow, he says casually, gesturing with his chin toward the back wall. Even the guy with the beard made of icicles and the haunted look of someone who's delivered a letter to a snowdrift and had it reply, "Of course you do." It hangs there, huge and tarnished, suspended from a wooden beam. About leaving behind a pinnacone or a story or a boot print in snow no one else has touched in weeks. Now it's a relic. And tradition dictates that every courier who passes through must ring it. Once. Just once. You step forward, take the braided rope in hand, and pull. The bell emits a deep, sonorous thumb, more heartbeat than a sound. Thomas doesn't react at all. Back outside, the night is creeping in, soft and slow. Ollie checks the route log and frowns. You look at the trail ahead, half buried already in white. Of course there's a storm. Still, before leaving, you're offered hospitality because while Finns are famously reserved, they are extremely serious about keeping guests alive in a snowstorm. There, by the stove, you find another curiosity, a painted board depicting the 5 posture types of moose couriers. A helpful visual guide. The proud rider, chest up, reins light, full of misguided optimism. The slump, back curled, eyes tired, dreams of warm feet. The leaner clings to the moose like it's a therapy animal. The side hug, one arm dangling off, contemplating snow philosophy. The folded pretzel, no one knows how they ended up like that. Probably magic. You're currently a blend of the slump and the side hug. Thomas doesn't seem to mind. After saying your goodbyes consisting mostly of nods and one firm handshake, you step back into the cold. As you ride out of Korpijärvi, Ollie skis silently alongside, then finally speaks. You're doing well, he says. Most new couriers cry by now. Or quit and become swamp poets. You grin. I'm not giving up, not yet, and you mean it. You're starting to understand why they did this, the couriers. The moose riders, it's not just about the mail. It's about moving through something big and cold and unreasonable. You pull your cloak tighter, adjust your posture, and settle in for the ride ahead. Thomas picks up speed ever so slightly, which, in moose terms, is basically sprinting. Thomas doesn't like the wind. That much is clear now. You've barely cleared the tree line beyond Korpijärvi when the first hard gust hits, sharp and insistent. Like nature just told a joke at your expense. Thomas stops, flares his nostrils, then lowers his head and presses forward. Ollie squints from behind his scarf, mutters something about typical ridge winds. And you realize this part of the journey won't be about speed. It'll be about stubbornness. Snow begins to drift sideways across the trail, not falling so much as traveling. A long, swirling sheet of frost snakes across the ground, curling around Thomas's legs like ghostly ribbons. The trail narrows, swallowed at the edges by wind-piled snow. You tuck your chin to your chest and let the moose do the thinking. And thank goodness he does, because the path ahead vanishes for a while. We're close to Tory Hill. You can't see more than a few meters, and everything looks the same way on what's that noise? Just as he was about to give up, his moose stopped, refused to go on, and then suddenly sat down, right there in the snow. Finally, when the storm broke, he realized he'd stopped a mere dozen steps from a frozen crevasse. The moose had smelled the thin ice, but Thomas keeps walking. Not aimlessly, never aimlessly. Others claim moose have a natural sixth sense for unstable ground, something we still don't fully understand. Some Finnish couriers train their moose with scent trails, birch oil, crushed juniper, or even smoked reindeer fat rubbed onto trees along the route. Moose may not be as smell-obsessed as dogs, but they've got better noses than you do guess for a creature with such goofy nostrils. It's hypnotic. One hoof, then another. The soft scrape of Ollie's skis behind you. The whistling wind. Somewhere in the background, a raven croaks nature's version of a sarcastic laugh. The descent is gentler here, more winding than steep, and flanked by stunted birches bent low under the snow. His ears twitch with every shift in the wind, his hooves strike each step with careful confidence. And you start to suspect he knows this place better than any map ever could. At least one 14th century source refers to a moose that refused to travel anywhere unless it was wearing a woven scarf soaked in lingonberry wine. Maybe it was superstition. Maybe the moose was just extra. You do mistake it for abandoned if not for the neat stack of firewood outside and the reindeer antlers nailed above the door like a silent greeting. Without a word, he opens the door wider and ushers you in. Now, here is your historical fact for the day. The moose and goat sniff each other once, come to a mutual understanding, and ignore each other completely. Low ceilings, wooden beams, and a long shelf of glass jars filled with of a courier who once hitched a ride on a migrating swan, of a wedding proposal sent by carved birch bark and delivered 3 months late but accepted anyway, pickled things. Rico speaks in a slow, melodic voice, offering you soup, bread, and what might be a boiled root or a very shy potato. And that odd detail you didn't ask for. Either way, the scarf made it into the village's coat of arms, so I guess it worked. Rico's cabin used to be one of them. But now he just lives here full-time and considers himself the last beacon keeper. I left with a limp and a greater respect for walking. The worst of the storm seems to be behind you. Ollie skis close, his silhouette barely visible in the thickening gusts. He points toward a crooked pine leaning sideways on a ridge. Landmark, he shouts over the wind. Good for energy. You thank him, climb back onto Tuomas, and watch as the little cabin shrinks behind you in the swirling snow. You can't hear the capital letters, but they're there. Tuuri means luck, and the story goes that centuries ago, a courier was lost in a whiteout blizzard on this very hill. Annoyed, the courier waited. Hours passed. He called it Tuuri, and the name stuck. Historians still debate whether that story is completely true or just one of those cozy postal myths that got exaggerated over the centuries. Some argue it was a lucky guess. But right now, riding up that hill with snowflakes crusting your eyelashes, it's easy to believe in Lucky Moose. Tuomas grunts at the top, flicks his ears forward, and then starts down again. You lean into the motion, your body rocking with the rhythm of his steps. The trees thin out again, and in the distance, you see it, a cabin. Just one, small, square, smoke curling from the chimney. Ollie gestures for a stop. This is Rico's place, he says. He keeps the trail beacon. You blink at him. There's a beacon? Well, sort of. Turns out, in some of Finland's more remote routes, couriers built little halfway shelters stocked with firewood, salted fish, and crude lanterns called valamaja light huts. He emerges from the cabin like a snow spirit wearing wool, all beard and kindness and smelling of smoked turnips. Inside, it's blissfully warm. Tuomas is given shelter to a lean-to filled with hay and an old goat named Lissu who seems both friendly and unimpressed. As you eat, Rico shares stories. He tells of a moose named Pavi who delivered emergency medicine during the flu outbreak of 1406. Ollie chuckles between sips of soup. Everyone's got a moose story. You ask if Rico ever rode one himself. Once, he says. Didn't go well. Moose decided we were enemies. You all laugh, and for a moment, the storm outside feels far away. But the road calls. As you leave, Rico hands you something wrapped in birch bark dried cloudberries, he says. Ahead lies more cold, more trail, more adventure. But for now, as Tuomas trudges forward and the wind finally starts to fade, you let yourself relax just a little. And besides, you've got lucky hooves on your side. You wake with your cheek pressed to a fur saddlebag and a crust of ice in your eyebrows. Somehow you must have dozed off on Tuomas's back. Not exactly recommended by the Moose Riders Association, if that existed, but oddly effective for getting through an early morning trek through central Finland. Ollie notices and smirks. If you start snoring, Tuomas might mistake it for a bear. You glance down and realize he's not entirely joking. Fresh tracks on the snowy trail, wider than a dog's, headed north into the pine woods. Fortunately, the moose doesn't seem concerned. He just blinks and keeps walking like he's got mail to deliver and no time for bear drama. And there, waiting for you beside a crooked milestone carved with ancient runes, is a man on skis wearing a red cap shaped like a four-pointed star. His name is Aro, and he's today's relay partner. By mid-morning, the trail opens into a low valley blanketed in powder. Instead, it passed from courier to courier, town to village, from someone like you to someone like Aro, all across the network like a whisper passed in winter wind. This is the part no one tells you about medieval Finland's postal system was based on relay chains. No one rider took the mail the full distance. You don't recognize the insignia, but it feels different. Heavier somehow. Maybe it's just your frozen fingers. Not just mailbags, but also information. Which trails are blocked, which villages are snowed in, where the wolves are lurking lately. It's all casual, like two delivery guys swapping notes at a truck stop if the trucks had antlers and liked to chew bark. The air feels older here. Even Tuomas slows his pace, nostrils flaring. It's a watch post half shed, half shred. Ollie places a pine cone beside it, some kind of symbol, perhaps. You don't ask. Somehow, it feels like the wrong place for questions. These were once common on the outer postal circuits, places where messengers rested, prayed, or simply dropped items too sensitive for general delivery. In fact, Aro writes something else entirely. Aro introduces his now as Pila, and Pila responds by trying to eat your glove. "We've got one more stop before the handover's final," he says. Secondary pouch, special letter. Others say they were for lost or wayward couriers offering one last safe place before the wild swallowed them whole. But not everyone rode moose, reindeer. Tuomas munches lichen off a branch while you eat a strip of smoked something that might once have been fish. Ollie pulls out a tiny bone flute and starts playing a tune so sad it could wilt a panic cone, smaller, more delicate. Smells like fermented hay and mischief. Tuomas snorts deep and derisive. The disdain is mutual. You dismount, stretch your legs, and watch as Ollie and Aro begin the exchange. For the first time today, you feel warm again, not in temperature, but in spirit. You hand off the main satchel, but Ollie pulls you aside. And when a tired moose named Tuomas decides for no apparent reason to take 3 perfectly timed steps in rhythm with your ridiculous dance, he hands you a smaller, weather-sealed packet marked with a wax seal in the shape of a crow. Or how many were saved by luck, instinct, and warm-blooded creatures with snow between their toes. "We'll drop this at Koharju," he adds, off the main path, a little odd. The trail to Ukaharju is narrower than the main road and much quieter. Pines close in, thick and watchful. And then you see it. Not a village, not even a farm, but a lone building surrounded by twisted birches and rock. Inside, the air is cold but still. You hang the pouch carefully on a peg carved with the shape of a moon. Historians still debate the role these watchposts played. Some claim they were early espionage hubs. Outside, Tuomas shifts his weight. He seems eager to leave. So you mount again and head out the way you came, retracing your hoof prints through the snow until the main path welcomes you back with wide skies and a softer breeze. Aro is long gone, but he's left something behind. A set of bundled letters marked for villages in the valley below. You'll be finishing this leg after all. The sun, though weak, hangs low and golden in the southern sky. It paints the snow in faint orange tones. Tuomas picks up his pace, glad for the clarity, the openness of the valley. And you? You find yourself humming a little tune that Rico sang by the fire. Something about a moose, a goat, and a very stubborn sled. Tuomas flicks an ear, possibly in disapproval, possibly in rhythm. You take that as encouragement. A short ways on, you stop to rest by a frozen creek. But then he grins and breaks into a faster rhythm. And suddenly, Tuomas is bobbing his head like he's been secretly waiting for this his whole life. You can't help but you dance a little. Just a few awkward steps in snow boots, hopping between hoof prints, arms flailing for balance. Ollie laughs. Even the moose seems amused. Life on the trail isn't glamorous. It's cold, messy, and often smells faintly of damp fur. But it's also this, moments when music echoes off frosty branches. When laughter outshines the wind, you'll never know how many letters were truly lost in these woods. But tonight, as you saddle up again and ride into the pink light of evening, it doesn't really matter. The mail moves. And so do you. The snow deepens as the path narrows once more, forcing Thomas to lift his legs higher and shift his gait. You sway with him, hands sunk deep into your mittens, chin tucked to your chest like a bundled turtle. At some point, your nose stopped registering temperature. It's just face now. His steps are measured, steady, each hoof print forming a perfect crater in the blanket of white. You imagine someone a week from now following those prints and thinking, what giant animal was hauling envelopes through this? Ollie, ever unbothered, hums another folk tune. You've noticed that the worse the trail conditions, the louder he sings. It's as if stubborn cheer is part of the postal code of conduct. Snow above your knees? Sing louder. You don't ask. He signs for the letter with a stick and tells you, bless the moose, which feels both random and entirely appropriate. It's a recipe from our cousin and Turku, something about smoked rye porridge and pickled juniper. She cries at the mention of dill. Each one is little more than a cluster of timber homes huddled around a chapel or a communal fire pit. The news, the ritual. In medieval Finland, mail wasn't just information. It was connection. A tether between isolated hearts wrapped in snow and distance. It's unmarked, save for a single word, Peavity's. You don't knock on doors here, you just show up and someone emerges. Always, like magic, or paranoia. Frostbite nibbling your ears? Throw in a harmony. Yes, you heard that right. A courier would deliver a message, then another courier would take a message back saying, got it. The 14th century read receipt. A girl with red braids and bare feet in the snow comes running with a bundle of outgoing letters. You give her 2 for her father, 1 for her neighbor, and 1 marked not open unless desperate for gossip. You chuckle and tuck the envelope carefully into your belt pouch. Not fast, not loud, but there. Thomas picks a careful line, testing the ice with each step. Beneath you, the world is silent, like the snow itself is holding its breath. She grins and disappears. Thomas, to his credit, doesn't falter. This stretch of the route leads into a series of small scattered villages. The first stop is Karpakylb, a hamlet known more for its bees than its people, though this time of year the bees are deeply asleep under stacked hives covered in quilts. Next, Ferry, where your delivery is interrupted by a pair of chickens chasing a man in a cloak. Others say she's just still doing her job. Then turns and vanishes into the trees, not with panic, but with purpose. Every village, every stop has its own oddness. And you begin to realize that delivering the post here isn't about the post at all, it's about the people. And sometimes those tethers got ... theatrical. In the third village, a woman insists on holding a public reading of her letter before accepting it. The northern sky opens above you like a slow blinking eye, and the cold settles into your shoulders with a comforting weight. The letter in your belt will make it to the next station. And out there somewhere, a riderless moose is still walking a forgotten trail. In the fourth, you're invited to stay for stew. It's rude to refuse. So you don't. Thomas waits patiently outside the whole time, looking frost off a wooden fence post and probably judging your table manners. Vanished, no mail found. No trace of her except sightings of Callan now and then, walking the routes, sniffing the wind, never allowing herself to be caught. By the time you leave that village, your boots now smelling faintly of onions and wood smoke, it's nearly dark. Ollie checks the sky, then pulls out a small wax-sealed envelope from his pack. What's that, you ask? He grins. An update. Apparently, in this era of slow messages, they occasionally sent letters just to confirm the letter had been received. Historians still debate whether this was bureaucratic overkill or a charming commitment to trust, but either way, it kept writers employed. The trail between these last few stops winds around a frozen marsh. Then snap, not the ice, just a twig off to your left. Thomas freezes. You follow his eyes to the tree line where something moves. Too tall for a wolf, too graceful for a bear. You don't speak, just wait, and then it steps out, another moose. Not wild, saddled, riderless. Its eyes meet yours, and for a moment you swear there's something old in that gaze. Tired, watchful, Thomas blinks. Then exhales, slow and heavy. Ollie whispers, "That's Kalla." Kalla, he explains, was the mount of a courier lost 3 winters ago, an older woman named Inkari, who rode the northern route through unmarked woods. Some say she's looking for Inkari. You don't move. Kala watches you a moment longer. The silence returns, heavier now. You and Ollie don't say much for the next mile. Back on the path, the stars begin to appear one by one. Tonight, you'll sleep in a hayloft above a bakery. The mail moves. And so does she. It's well after moonrise by the time you reach the bakery, a squat, timber-bird building hunched like a sleeping bear at the edge of a frozen river. Smoke curls from the chimney and a soft yellow light flickers behind a frost-fogged window. He sees the saddlebags, nods once, and gestures you both in. Inside, the air is so thick with warm bread and toasted grain you nearly sink to the floor from relief. Twilma snorts as if to say, finally. The baker, a sleepy man with enormous eyebrows and flour on his nose, opens the door without a word. Twilma doesn't come in, of course. He gets a small shed to himself out back, lined with dry moss and, strangely, an old harp no one remembers putting there, with my nephew. He sleep-talks in Latin, don't mind it. The nephew is already there, bundled in furs, whispering Aquila non capit muscus, in his sleep. You settle beside him and stare at the rafters while the warmth slowly defrosts your knees. You'll have to share the loft, the baker mutters as he hands you a blanket that smells like rye. The ladder creaks as you climb into a nest of hay and soft shadows. He turns when he sees you. That is not a metaphor. You will literally ride across frozen lakes like they're oversized dinner plates, hoping nothing decides to crack beneath your weight. Roads through the forests were slow, dangerous, and often buried. But lakes? Flat, direct, and if frozen thick enough, a postal dream come true. You think of Kala, the riderless moose, and wonder if she's still out there, still walking the snowy woods by moonlight. His hooves tap softly against the ice, and you try not to think about how deep the water might be underneath. Sleep comes slowly but thickly, like molasses poured in a dream. By morning, the nephew is gone. So is half your blanket inexplicably chewed. You fall into a rhythm again, hoof breath, and time turns elastic. You descend to find Ollie warming his hands by the oven and talking to the baker in a language that might just be entirely made of vowels. Today's a long one, he says, but easy terrain, mostly flat. You chew on a hunk of yesterday's bread, now tough as a pine log, and prepare to ride. Personally, I think the moose just didn't like the rider. Twilma greets you with a rumbling grunt. You pat his side and mount, saddle creaking under your weight and your breath puffing like fog dragons in the chill air. That's Genpeka, patron spirit of overly ambitious couriers. No one knows why. It's covered in faded runes and what appears to be a squirrel drawn holding an envelope. The trail south opens wide and firm, a hard-packed snow path lined by skeletal birches. Twilma even trots a little, his breath coming out in rhythmic bursts like a steam engine with antlers. Ollie tells you today's route will cross 3 lakes. Every year they melt, they're forgotten. Every year they freeze again, they come back. Sunlight glints off its surface like it's been powdered in crushed diamonds. It's here that Twilma slows. Lake crossings were the wintertime shortcut of choice in medieval Finland. Smoke curls into the sky and the warmth seeps into your bones like kindness. Twilma lies down for once, his legs folding under him like a kneeling knight. You've earned a break. A sorrow. Maybe a warning. Or maybe just the world humming itself to sleep. Twilma steps onto the first lake like a king reclaiming his kingdom. The surface is glassy, clear enough in places to see trapped air bubbles, and, if your nerves get creative, ghostly fish staring up at you like postal supervisors from the underworld. Halfway across, Ollie tells you about the time a moose and rider fell through during a warm winter spell. Ollie unrolls the delivery scrolls for the next stops, each marked with wax seals in different shapes. An axe, a fish, a wheel. Every symbol tells a story, and every village waits for its next chapter. They survived. The ice sings. High, ghostly, and just off-key enough to make you want to wrap your scarf a little tighter. But then you hear it. Barely. Historians still debate whether it was heroic bravery or reckless luck, he says with a shrug. You glance down at Twilma. He flicks an ear. Noted. The second lake is easier, snow-dusted and opaque, and you pass over it like a dream on ice. You pause at the far end by a half-buried shrine carved into a rock face. Ollie points. He drops a pine nut at the base of the carving. You do the same. When in Finland. The third lake is the widest yet. At first, you think he's tired. A soft sound. Not cracking, not exactly, more like singing. Wind plays across the frozen surface, creating eerie tones that rise and fall like a choir trapped in glass. Thomas keeps walking. You grip the reins tighter, not because of fear, but because you don't want to fall under that music spell. Locals say it's the lake remembering. Ollie mutters. Voices caught in the freeze, you don't speak, just listen. There's a rhythm to it. When you reach solid land again, the quiet is so complete it feels heavy. Even Ollie doesn't joke. You set up a small fire at the edge of a pine copse. You eat roasted pine nuts and share the last of the dried berries. The day is fading again and you've got another few miles before night. But right now, you just sit there, fire crackling. Moose snoring. The wind not singing anymore, just breathing softly across the snow. You don't fully remember falling asleep only, but you woke with your face buried in a scarf that smells like roasted pine nuts and smoke in your left. Boot half untied thanks to what you can only assume was a curious woodland creature with bad taste. Thomas is already awake, upright, and chewing moss off a tree stump with the air of someone very busy doing something very important. You stretch, yawn, and watch as your breath floats upward like a ghost you've just evicted from your lungs. Ollie, predictably, is nowhere to be seen. You find him around the bend, standing knee-deep in a snowdrift, trying to coax a magpie down from a branch with a crust of bread and some intense eye contact, or nosy. She's been following us, he says, not turning. Pretty sure she's from the monastery, trained maybe. You wave to the bird. She does not wave back. Instead, she flutters her wings and drops something into the snow, a small waxy envelope sealed with a familiar symbol. It's the squirrel again. Well, bless Jen-Pekka, Ollie mutters, retrieving the letter. Just that thick, muffled hush that precedes a very rude weather event. Delay optional. Tea ready by dusk if you hurry. It's unsigned, courier via magpie. That's new. He opens the note and reads aloud. Incoming blizzard. You stare at the sky. There's a weird stillness, no birdsong, no wind. He's seen this before. He knows what to do. The way the trees blur into a soft watercolor of whites and grays. The way your thoughts quiet down, reduced to simple things, warmth, direction, staying upright. Saddle up. You're riding blind now, following instinct, memory, and the occasional trail marker shaped like a fish nailed to a tree. Let's try and outrun a blizzard. Maybe while snow like this curled against a wooden window pane. Maybe while a moose snored in a nearby shed. What could go wrong? Thomas seems to agree. His ears flick and he exhales hard enough to frost your jacket from 6 feet away. Not a playful breeze, but the kind of wind that feels like it's trying to slap you across the face with frozen mittens. It howls between the trees, tossing up snow devils and snatching words right out of your mouth. All right, Ollie says, already walking. You groan. Your legs are still half asleep, and your nose has officially declared a mutiny. But you climb onto Thomas, adjust your bag of letters, and follow the trail south narrow, frozen, and winding like a loose thread across the fabric of the woods. The first hour is quiet. The snow comes lightly, dusting your shoulders and eyebrows like nature's attempt at holiday glitter. You decide not to ask how or why. The second hour is less cute. The wind picks up. Thomas keeps going, head low, muscles steady. You, on the other hand, feel like a human popsicle in a fur hat. A clay oven radiates heat from one wall, and a pot of tea the size of your head simmers quietly in the corner. It smells of cedar and cardamom. And yet, there's something peaceful about it, too. Ollie starts singing again. Of course he does. There was no printing press in every village. No ink-smudged newspaper boys yelling headlines. You can stay until the storm passes. Just don't touch the left cupboard. News came folded, sealed, and sometimes carried in the mouth of a bird. It's a lullaby this time. Old and slow. The kind that might have been hummed to children 1,000 years ago. And listens as Ollie delivers the latest batch of letters like a magician performing a routine. She doesn't give a last name, and you're too tired to press. The path disappears under fresh snow, and then you see it. A cabin. Just ahead. Smoke from the chimney. You don't even wait. You dismount, wobble to the door, and knock with frozen fingers. It opens slowly. Inside is a woman with silver hair braided like rope, holding a steaming kettle in one hand and a short sword in the other. She blinks, then says, "Took you long enough." Ollie waltzes in like he owns the place. You follow, clumsily removing your gloves and hat, feeling like an abandoned scarecrow. Tuomas snorts and stays outside, content under the cabin's small overhang, where someone has thoughtfully left a pile of lichen and a blanket. Inside, the cabin is warm, ridiculously warm. You collapse onto a bearskin rug and immediately forget what day it is. The woman's name is Ayla. She pours tea, slices bread with the sword. Each letter brings a reaction, a laugh, a sigh, a small smile that disappears as quickly as it arrived. Because this is how information moved in the north, slowly, personally, and often with tea. Ayla reads a letter from her niece 3 times. Then she tucks it into a wooden box carved with spirals and says, "You do not touch the left cupboard." That night, you sleep in a bed that smells of lavender and firewood. Outside, the storm howls and throws icy tantrums. But inside, the world is still. And in the middle of that stillness, you begin to understand why anyone would trust a moose with something as delicate as hope. Because sometimes the gentlest thing in the world is also the strongest. And sometimes the post must get through even if it rides on antlers. You wake slowly. The storm has passed, but it left its mark-thick snow plastered to every surface like a frosted cake from some angry sky chef. The windows glow with that unique kind of morning light that makes the snow look pink around the edges, like the world blushing. Somehow and possibly the lichen pile has grown overnight. Maybe as the fact that you survived a blizzard on the back of a moose named after a folk hero. Tuomas is awake too, already stomping softly at the edge of the trees. You dress in layers still warm from the hearth and sip the last of Isla's tea, which tastes stronger today. Maybe it's the herbs. Ollie packs up the satchels, humming something that sounds suspiciously like a love song to choose. She doesn't say goodbye, just offers a wink and an extra pair of mittens. Ayla stands by the door as you leave, hands clasped, sword still hanging from her apron loop. You take them. They're embroidered with little antlers. You try not to feel personally insulted by how much more majestic he looks in snow than you do. Back on the trail, Tuomas moves with fresh energy, like the cold reinvigorated him. The journey today cuts through an old reindeer trail, narrow, shadowy, and lined with the remnants of wooden markers, many carved with swirling patterns that resemble wind or antlers, depending on your imagination and caffeine level. This used to be a sacred path. Ollie tells you. Moose-shaped cookies, wooden dolls. Maybe a theme song performed on a single-string lyre. Centuries ago, before organized postal routes, it was a ceremonial road for seasonal migration and offerings runners would carry messages. Yes, Tuomas climbs without complaint. Below you sprawls a small fishing village, frozen docks, clustered cottages, and one oddly large bell tower with an icicle longer than your moose hanging from its roof. And elderly women selling dried fish from stalls that look like they were built entirely from regret and rope. Your thighs do not. But also omens, wishes, and warnings passed from one encampment to the next. She once ran from Lake Inari to the Gulf of Bothnia in 2 days, then promptly demanded a bowl of cloudberries and a nap. There's a wide inlet ahead, ice-crusted, wind-scraped, and dangerous. At one curve in the trail, you spot a shrine carved into the side of a birch. A crude moose figure, eyes wide, legs mid-stride, tongue sticking out. He grunts and thanks, then disappears into a home that looks suspiciously like it was built around a boat. "That's Sarah the Swift," Ollie says with a grin. Historians still debate whether she was a real person or just an early post office mascot, he adds, which you believe instantly. There's something beautifully absurd about the idea that medieval Finland had postal mascots. The path rises steeply after that. You reach a rocky overlook by midday, panting and rosy-faced. Tuomas seems unimpressed. You descend into the village slowly, past wind-chapped children chasing each other with snowballs the size of cannonballs. The mail drop here is less formal. You pass a bundle of scrolls to a man with one eye and a fur hat so tall it deserves its own weather system. You don't linger. Ollie leads you to the harbor, where the frozen shoreline crunches like hard candy under Tuomas's hooves. "We cross here," Ollie says. It's soft, persuasive, like a librarian shushing you from 300 miles away. You blink. That's a fjord. He nods. Yup, you stare. That's a frozen fjord. Her boots crunch quietly on the ice. He grins. You try to think of a polite way to decline. Something like, I've just remembered I'm allergic to death. But Thomas is already stepping onto the ice, steady and majestic. You sigh and follow, trying not to imagine being frozen into a postage-themed popsicle for eternity. The ice creaks underfoot, not cracking exactly, but groaning, like it's tired of being stepped on by hoofed animals and their shivering companions. About halfway across, the wind returns. It isn't sharp like the blizzard. You hear something strange, faint music. Ollie stops. Do you hear that? You nod. Thomas snorts. A figure appears ahead. Walking, slowly, abandoned but solid. You light a small fire in the corner, curl under a blanket of questionable hygiene, and finally open the wooden box. Not alarming, just unexpected. As they approach, you see it's a woman wrapped in layers of seal fur, carrying a wooden box tied with twine. She stops in front of you, squinting against the light. Message for Carpila, she says. You frown. I'm not Carpila. She nods once. You will be. Then she hands you the box and walks off into the light, vanishing like a ghost with good posture. You look at Ollie. He shrugs. That happens sometimes. You don't open the box. Not yet. Thomas picks up pace again, perhaps motivated by a sudden desire to leave this haunted patch of ice. You cross the rest of the fjord without incident, although you're pretty sure something followed you. Or maybe the wind just changed direction. By the time you reach the opposite shore, the village behind you has disappeared into mist, and your fingers are stiff as tiny logs. Ollie suggests a quick stop at a shepherd's hut he remembers from childhood, provided it hasn't been eaten by foxes. It hasn't. The hut is still there. Inside, dried cloudberries and a note. 3 words written in tiny angular letters. You're almost there. You stare at it for a long moment. Then you smile. The journey isn't over, not yet, but tonight you rest. With a moose outside the door, a box of sweet fruit in your lap, and a strange sort of peace humming under the floorboards. The next morning arrives like a whisper, tugging gently at your eyelids. There's no sunlight, exactly, just a slow shift from darkness to something slightly less dark. Northern Finland in deep winter doesn't deal in brightness. There's a kind of stillness out here, like the landscape is pausing between heartbeats. It deals in hints, like a theater curtain moving just enough to let you know the play isn't over. The trail today cuts through what Ollie calls the spine of the forest, an unbroken stretch of pines so tall and tightly packed that the wind has given up trying to pass through. No birdsong, no rustling. Just the soft crunch of hooves over old snow and the occasional squeak of your gloves. He lowers his head and exhales sharply. You crack the frost off your scarf and step outside. The ground dips and curves, and Thomas takes each turn with careful precision, like he's done this route 100 times. Ollie explains that early postal routes were often mapped using personal symbols rather than standardized signs. Each courier left a visual breadcrumb trail, unique, artistic, cryptic, to help guide the next rider through unfamiliar terrain, and well, maybe he has. Thomas munches on a frozen apple he found who knows where. You wonder again how much he understands. Probably everything. It's clearly been used often. Burn marks. Scattered bones. A spoon hanging from a nail. Thomas is already awake, standing with his nose to the wind. His breath hangs in clouds that drift slowly sideways. You ride in silence at first, letting the rhythm of Thomas's steps settle into your bones. After a few miles, the path begins to narrow, twisting along the edge of a frozen ravine. The wood is smooth, newer than anything else around it. There's no lock. No label. Its antlers are painted gold. Its eyes are painted shut. Just a faint engraving on the top. You pass strange markers carved into the tree symbols resembling spirals. Crossed arrows and once, inexplicably, what looks like a cat wearing a crown. Either way, it makes your chest feel warm. You think GPS is weird now, he says. Imagine depending on a tree carving of a frowning frog to know you're still on the right path. One of the symbols, an upside-down fish with wings, makes Thomas stop entirely. Yeah, the forest parts were replaced by wide, flat fields crusted in wind-scoured snow. You can see the next village in the distance, a cluster of stone buildings and spindly chimney stacks exhaling pale smoke. You did good. It's the thought that counts, she says. Not out of obligation, out of respect. One of them shrieks, "It's the moose post," and runs straight into Thomas's side to hug him. Then leans in and whispers, "Cheese." And maybe a bit of superstition. Trouble, you ask? Ollie frowns. Could be. That symbol means snow trolls. A drop box, emergency relay. Sometimes couriers would leave resources for the next traveler, especially if the weather turned or routes became dangerous. It was unofficial, but respected. The ice is a perfect mirror, smooth as glass. It's almost pretty enough to distract you from what lies ahead. You stare at him. He grins. Kidding, it's just a rest stop. Let's just say Tuomas will do most of the work. Tuomas turns off the path and heads toward a clearing with a small wooden shelter, no walls. Just a roof on stilts and a fire pit surrounded by mossy stones. You sit for a while, passing around a crust of rye bread and some surprisingly spicy dried fish. Then, just before you're ready to move on, something unusual catches your eye. A box, not buried, not hidden. Just sitting at the edge of the shelter, dusted in snow like it's been waiting. You brush it off. For the next courier, you open it. Inside are supplies, thread, wool socks, an iron flint, 2 sealed letters, and a carved wooden figurine shaped like a moose. You look at Ollie. What is this? He shrugs. Historians still debate whether these traditions were part of a larger organized effort or just spontaneous acts of kindness passed down from one rider to the next. You leave one of your wool scarves in the box. As you ride away, Tuomas tosses his head once almost proudly. You pat his shoulder. The landscape shifts again in the afternoon. As you approach, a group of children runs out to meet you, dragging sleds and wearing coats at least 3 sizes too big. Tuomas accepts this with weary nobility. You deliver 6 letters, 1 package of dried mushrooms, and a tiny scroll labeled "Confession. Burn after reading." You don't ask. The village elder insists on reading aloud one of the letters you brought, even though it's clearly just an invoice for firewood. She weeps anyway. You don't argue. Later, a man in a thick brown tunic hands you a return package wrapped in bark and tied with sinew. It's surprisingly heavy. "What's in here?" you ask. He looks left. You glance at the label, "To Bishop Auntie," with urgency. You nod gravely, "Of course, emergency cheese." As you prepare to leave, Ollie points to a frozen pond at the edge of the village. "See that?" he says. You do. "That's the last easy stretch," he says. "After this, we start the incline." You raise an eyebrow. "How steep?" He shrugs. You ride out as the sun finally brushes the edge of the horizon, a sliver of burnt gold over the treetops. The final climb. Tuomas walks with slow determination, already sensing what's coming. The trail narrows once more. Hills rise like old bones ahead of you. And somewhere up there, tucked into the highest reach of the old Nil route, is the last outpost. The place where all this began. And if you're lucky, where it will all come full circle. The trail tilts upward before you even notice it. It's one of those climbs that starts slow, just a little pull in your calves. A little more tilt in Tuomas's neck, and then gradually turns into something else entirely. By the time you realize you're ascending properly, it feels like your breath has been traded for steam. The snow deepens again. Not the soft, airy powder you could dreamily fall into, but the dense, knee-bracing kind that hides rocks. At least up here you don't get surprise sea spray to the face, or seagulls trying to eat your bread mid-bite. And frozen branches like it's playing a long, elaborate joke. Tuomas moves like a beast possessed. You try not to think about the angle of the slope, the strain in his legs, or how much farther you have to go. Ollie, of course, is behind you, whistling what might be a funeral march. "Still better than the coastal route," he says as you duck beneath a frost-draped pine. "Helpful," you reply, wheezing a little. The climb leads through the Taivaskallio Pass, one of the oldest recorded postal inclines in Finnish history. Used as early as the 13th century by forced couriers known locally as Metsposti. That moose will only walk it if they believe the mail is truly important. You feel them now. In every gust of icy wind. in every shift of the trees that look more like frozen statues than living things. Some relied on skis or snowshoes, hauling tiny sleds. But when moose did become part of the system, this trail brutal, narrow high became one of their proving grounds. If your moose can handle Tyvascalio, the old saying went, they can handle anything, even delivering divorce papers in a blizzard. With a toss of his head, he digs in, hooves crunching deep into the crust. Like ghosts of past deliveries still drifting up the trail. You've seen finished divorce letters. Someone who did this long before you, probably with worse boots and less cheese. They come with instructions and occasionally a recipe. The Mets Postal didn't always use moose. The land below you stretches out in folds and ripples, forests frozen in time, rivers stitched in silver beneath sheets of frost. Glimmers, threads of dancing light that tease the eye. You can see the trail behind you, winding like a vein through the trees. You can see the clouds forming a great sweep above, tinged with the first hints of green, and that's saying something. Ollie mutters something, then climbs down and begins kicking at the snow ahead. Halfway up, Thomas stops. Only her eyes show sharp, clever, and a little amused. She says nothing at first, just looks at Thomas, then at you. Then nods once. You pause with him. There's a legend, he says, that this stretch is cursed. You give him a look. You mean like, emotionally? A place where human and animal shared one job description, move the word forward. Most modern folks assume it's long gone, buried or abandoned. But here it is, wooden roof frosted like cake. Smoke curling up in a single lazy column. A sign on the front door carved in Finnish and Sami, the last active rider of the Tyvascalio line. When her knees gave out, she returned here not to retire, but to tend the moose, repair the harnesses, and teach the next generation how to tie a letter pouch that wouldn't fall off at the worst possible moment. Deeply, Thomas huffs, you sigh. Well, we've got emergency cheese. And a scroll labeled, to be opened only under moonlight. That's probably enough. He can rest there tonight. You, too. Thomas seems to agree. The climb resumes. You pass another rest point, this one, nothing more than a leaning post and a carved rock with initials, KR 1329, someone's signature. And then you reach the ridge. You smell pine tar, old tea, and something faintly animal but not unpleasant. Thomas waits just outside the threshold, snorting tiny clouds of steam. The sky opens. It's not just wide, it's endless. The aurora is coming, not in full yet, just hints. And there, a head tucked into the side of the ridge like a secret, is the final outpost. The Moosekeeper Station. You've heard of it, of course. Half story, half myth. A little cabin where postal moose are born, raised, and retired. Posty I pishti. The mail doesn't stop. Thomas stops just outside, and it's Ollie who knocks. The door creaks open to reveal an old woman with more blankets than facial features. She turns back inside without a word, leaving the door open. You follow, because what else is there to do? Inside, it's warm in the way only a wood stove can offer. The woman sets 3 mugs on the table, one for you, one for Ollie, and one placed curiously on the floor. You look at Ollie. Thomas has earned it, he says. The woman finally speaks. You came the old way. You nod. She smiles. Few still do. Over the next hour, you learn she was once a courier herself. You show her the emergency cheese. She snorts. Typical Bishop auntie. Thomas eventually enters and stands by the fire. The woman pats him gently, checks his hooves, then points to a large stable behind the cabin. You nod gratefully. But before you leave the main room, she reaches beneath the table and hands you something. A package. Wrapped in bark, tied with red thread, no markings. What's this? She just smiles. You'll know when. As you step out into the night, the aurora finally unfolds above you, ribbons of green and blue twisting through the stars like a dance choreographed by the sky itself. Thomas breathes in, lifts his head, and watches. And so do you. Because for a moment, just one, you're not a courier or a rider or even a person trying to stay warm. You're part of the route, you're part of the light, and the mail. Continues. The cabin sleeps like a storybook, dream logs creaking softly in the cold, the fire sighing into embers. Tuomas nestled in straw with his eyes half closed and his mouth still full of hay. You wake early because the road still calls and because the old woman left you a note. Downhill is easier. Until it isn't. You tuck the mystery package into your satchel. It feels heavier than it looks, like it contains secrets or stones or very dense opinions. Ollie yawns, already bundled and chewing something that smells like dried onion and poor decisions. One part of the trail is still nicknamed Stairway to Moose. The ground here is marshy under the snow, with wooden slats laid decades ago to keep carts and hooves from sinking into the peat. You step carefully, one plank at a time. A nearby sign reads in fading paint, 3 valleys to cross today, he mutters. The second one is famous for being aggressively unremarkable. As you leave the ridge, the world opens again. Sunlight filters through pine branches, dusting the path with pale gold. Tuomas lowers his head and powers through, his antlers slicing the air like a slow-motion battle charge. You hear birds' tiny, brave things that sound like wind chimes. The descent begins gently. Some letters, it's said, never made it through. Others arrived with messages added in hands no one recognized. Tuomas leads, his massive hooves choosing the way with practiced confidence. You ever meet a ghost who pays postage? He scoffs, just walks across like he's balancing on air. Ollie lights a fire and you sit beside Tuomas, who flops into the snow with the full confidence of someone too large to be told no. Your breath crystallizes in front of you. Tuomas moves slower now, each step more careful. He doesn't like it either. It's an old courier seal, one used for generations to mark official documents delivered by moose or man. Something about the silence here feels too arranged. You, meanwhile, develop a very close relationship with gravity. This section of the route was once known as the 3 breaths, trailed because early couriers claimed they had to stop 3 times, just to catch their breath from all the climbing and slipping and uphill swearing. The air clears, trees grow more freely. You've crossed through intact, unhaunted, and mildly dehydrated. Means you're not just finishing the route. You don't know who the next recipient will be. You just know they're waiting. You're part of it now. There's a pause at the first valley. Yes, the moose can cross. Can you? Tuomas doesn't even blink. The second valley really is aggressively unremarkable. It's just flat. A big, snow-covered field with nothing to say for itself. Even Ollie grows quiet here, chewing his dried onions and squinting at the sky as if waiting for something mildly dramatic to happen. It doesn't, and then comes the third valley, a narrow pass carved between 2 ice-glazed ridges. Here, the wind howls like it's auditioning for a horror film. Trees bend in protest. This valley is called Hamalakso Ghost Valley. Every strange step has led here. Historians still debate whether the name refers to real apparitions or just the way the wind can sound like 100 voices whispering names you never told anyone. Ollie says it's nonsense, but you notice he doesn't talk much while you're inside it. The wind cuts sharp. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pass ends. At the edge of the woods, a small rest station waits a wooden lean-to with a barrel of firewood and a tin of biscuits marked, for the brave or the bored. You unwrap the package. Inside, nestled in layers of birch bark and old cloth, is a carved wooden stamp. Its base is etched with an emblem asterisk a moose had, framed by pine branches. Above the words, Posty Kolki, the mail moves. You turn it over in your hand. Thought those were gone, Ollie says quietly, peering over your shoulder. You glance at him. What does it mean? He shrugs. The fire pops. It has a strange feeling like being handed the keys to a house you didn't know you'd been living in. Tuomas nudges you with his nose, possibly demanding snacks, possibly offering support. Hard to tell. As you sit beneath the trees, wind rustling above, fire warming below, you think back on the miles behind you, the training paddocks, the river crossings, the nuns with the jam letters, the ghost valley. You seal the stamp inside your satchel next to the letters still waiting for delivery, and you'll get there. Because that's what couriers do. Because the mail moves, always. Even through snow, wind, ghosts, and valleys that smell faintly of regret, Tuomas snorts as if to say, let's keep going. And you do. Tuomas doesn't need prompting. He rises from his snowy lounge like some ancient forest god reluctantly returning from a nap. The fire at the Lenta sputters behind you. Ollie scoops the last of the mystery biscuits into his pocket with zero shame. Or rather, it's older snow packed down by wind and time, and perhaps a few fellow travelers who, like you, believe the path still matters. And once again, the trail stretches forward like a ribbon loosely tied around the earth. There's less snow here. According to the weather-worn map etched on your memory and a damp one in Ollie's back pocket, you are now approaching the segment known historically as the Old Iron Spine. Not a poetic name. It refers to the narrow, rust-colored ridge that runs for 6 kilometers, winding through ancient forest and exposed stone, treacherous in icy seasons and used heavily during Finland's medieval iron rush. In the 1400s, blacksmiths along the southern coast depended on these postal moose routes to bring them news from Lapland, where rumors of iron-rich bogs had spread like butter over flatbread. It wasn't uncommon for a single moose courier to carry contracts, forged samples, and scribbled geologic guesses all stuffed into one very nervous saddlebag. You, meanwhile, have adopted the cautious waddle of someone who values their tailbone. Just in case the inspector's ghost is still taking notes, Thomas sniffs it, uninterested. Ollie stares for a while, then shrugs. One of the oldest intact letters from this era contains the phrase, "Dear brother, the soil stinks of profit." Thomas, to his credit, navigates the ridge with a sort of balance that makes Olympic figure skaters seem like clumsy ducklings. His hooves barely tap the stone. "This part always gave me goosebumps," Ollie says, glancing over the side where the ground disappears into frosted trees and probable doom. "Because of the height?" You ask. If your seal was crooked or your parcel smelled like fish, it'd hit you with a citation. Whether it was ever used or just an ancient prank carved into the landscape, you may never know. Pines rise like sleepy guards, their trunks striped with frost. Thomas slows, ears alert. You hear something not threatening, not loud just. Music. Historians still debate whether the ridge once hosted a temporary winter dock during a freak flood in 1472, or whether some courier just wanted to mess with future generations, or an arrow, depending on her mood. No, because this is where the postal inspector used to live. You blink. I thought that was a myth. But pieces, the jam letter, the emergency cheese, the ghost valley, the package, the stamp. Oh, very real. She was famous. Had a longbow, a telescope, and a terrible temper. Your fingers tingle, but you're close now. You can feel it. One of them, the rope braider, nods slowly and says, "We saw a moose courier once. Thought it was a dream." Beside it, carved into a tree, is the phrase, "You feel your satchel instinctively and pat it." Halfway down the ridge, you spot something strange, a rusted metal ring bolted into the stone, with a fraying bit of rope still knotted through it. They're dressed in layers upon layers of fur, wool, and curiosity. One plays a jaw harp. Another is braiding a rope from birch bark. It's about becoming one. The third gestures for you to join them, smiling. "Mooring point," he says. For what? One side reads, "Keep going." The other, "Turn back." He grins. "Mailboats." You laugh. "There's no water here." Exactly. You're about to call him out when he winks and walks ahead. The forest thickens again at the end of the ridge. Low humming. Ollie hears it too. You follow the sound, veering gently from the trail, into a clearing where 3 figures sit around a makeshift table carved from snow and wood. Travelers, like you. They offer warm tea and a story, and in return they ask for one of yours. So you tell them, not all of it, not yet. They listen with the reverence of those who know the journey is more than the distance covered. Thomas, apparently eavesdropping, lets out a soft, proud grunt. The sun lowers as you talk, and the snow around the clearing takes on the faintest hue of apricot and rose. As you rise to leave, they hand you a small wooden token, a coin-sized disc with the image of a moose walking into the wind. You smile and pocket it, not for guidance, but for luck. The trail resumes. Your feet ache. The final stretch winds past an old Sami resting posta, low structure of stone and bark that's half collapsed and fully coated in lichen. Deliver it well or not at all. You nod more to yourself than anyone, because at this point you understand. This whole route from the icy paddocks to the ridge and the valleys and the fire-warmed cabins, ice and tea, just about delivering messages. You are the letter now. And somewhere ahead, the recipient waits. You wake up before the sun does, tucked beneath a blanket of wool and pine smoke, your head against Thomas's warm flank. The sky's that perfect pre-dawn gray, so still it hums. Everything smells like frost in the past. Today, the mail gets delivered. There's a kind of hush on final mornings, like the road itself is holding its breath. Ollie's already up, steaming a pot of something medicinal that definitely tastes like regret. Moose may not be great conversationalists, but they understand destination better than most creatures. A letter doesn't question its envelope, it just goes. He hands you a cup with no explanation. You sip. It burns. Possibly illegal in 3 provinces. Just the steady rhythm of hooves on packed snow and the occasional wheeze from Ollie, who claims he's allergic to emotional conclusions. No more detours, he says simply, brushing frost from his cap. Thomas is already saddled. He knows the final stretch is quiet. No storms, no singing nuns. A dog barks somewhere. A child gasps loudly at the sight of Thomas, then promptly tries to climb him. You deliver a stern look. Ollie pushes the door open, and inside, dust, parchment, an iron stove, and a row of cubby holes where messages once lived. He peers at you, at Thomas, at the satchel. He says nothing, just motions you forward. A brass bell waits on the counter. You ring it. Thomas delivers a snort, a child's drawing of a bird. A contract sealed with moose hair. You add the carved stamp carefully, reverently beside them all. The town is tucked between 2 hills, where the land softens and the smoke rises in peaceful spirals. Others claim it lingered longer in the north, long after the ink dried on royal postal reforms. But here on this ridge, none of that matters. Because it's alive again. Because you're still carrying the mail. It's not heavy, but it's warm from a small stove, a stamped envelope addressed to wherever you're going next. No seal. Just one phrase written in neat, looping script. You spot it from the ridge, just roofs and chimneys, and a little tower with a copper bell. Your heart does something strange. It steps sideways. This is where the route ends. Historians still debate when the official Moose Postal line was discontinued. Some say the mid-1700s. When sleigh roads became more dependable, the town gate squeals open like it hasn't moved in weeks. The streets are nearly empty, but faces peer through curtains. Someone rings the bell in the little tower. It chimes gently, like a whisper against time. No questions. No return address. You tuck the letter into your coat. You head straight for the old postal station abandoned by bureaucracy, but still standing like a lighthouse. No one answers. Then footsteps, slow, shuffling, uncertain. An old man enters from a side room, wrapped in 3 coats and a scarf that has seen better decades. You open the bag. One letter after another, you place them on the counter. A bundle tied with waxed twine. The jam-scented envelope. Just trees, snow, and maybe the faintest sound of hooves and the distant echoes of those who came before. The old man nods. This, he says, voice dry as crumpled paper, was supposed to arrive 70 years ago. You blink. Sorry, we got delayed. He chuckles, a sound like rusted hinges. You're the last, then. Before you can ask what that means, he takes the letters and begins sorting them gently, like they're bones being laid to rest. Ollie coughs. Well, that's that. But it isn't, not yet. The old man reaches under the counter and places something in your hand. You turn it over. Pass it on. You nod. Outside, Thomas stands waiting. Not tired, not done, just ready. You walk through the town slowly. At the far end of town, where the road vanishes into the trees again, Ollie stops. This is where we split, he says. You look at him. Don't get emotional, he mutters, blinking hard. I hate hugging. I'm made of soup. He hands you a small pouch of dried lingonberries and turns around without waiting for a reply. Thomas nudges your side. You look down at your feet, then at the forest ahead. It doesn't ask questions, doesn't promise answers. You climb onto Thomas's back. The wind picks up. The letter in your pocket is warm. The trail continues, and you ride. Because someone somewhere is still waiting. Because the mail still moves. Because you are the moose courier now. And the world, gentle, odd, and quietly ancient, still needs your message. And so the ride ends where it began, in the hush between snowfall and story, between memory and motion. You've walked and tripped and snacked your way through a forgotten sliver of the world, one hoofall at a time. The mail was delivered, the soup was questionable, and the moose was magnificent. But tonight, none of that matters. Through pine forests and frozen bogs, over iron ridges and under sleeping skies, you became part of something strange, an old system stitched together by need, trust, and a surprising number of cheese wheels. The medieval Finnish postal route may not have had uniforms or trucks or tracking numbers, but it had heart and hooves. Big ones. Historians may still argue over the details, whether the moose were trained or just bred with snacks, whether the couriers worked alone or in relay, whether any of this was official or gloriously improvised. Because you felt it now, the rhythm of the trail, the odd dignity of delivering something that might never be read, the sleepy satisfaction of finishing a journey no one else remembered. If you're still awake, maybe you're not. But if your eyes are still open, know this, you carried the message well. You did not drop the jam letter. And you can always write again if you need to. Tuomas will be waiting. Probably chewing something illegal.